Okay, this is essentially an Airpods Pro 2 versus Pro 3 subjective review. Just a quick initial impressions because I think there's some important things to point out. Dave 2D was largely correct, is what I'm going to say. But I also want to take this opportunity to speak to some of the things that listener had mentioned in his headphones.com video. This is not a takedown. This is not a retaliation video. Nothing like that. He's right. Whatever he said in the headphones.com video was absolutely right. But there seems to be a sense of alarm in the community because of what he said, and I want to just assuage some of those worries. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So, AirPods Pro 2 versus Pro 3. The Pro 3 is a little bit larger in every dimension, including the earbud in the ear. They're not fitting me as comfortably as the AirPods Pro 2 does, but they're a little more snug. I think I'm going to have to downsize the ear tips this time around, which usually is not something I do. From a sound point of view, you'll remember that Dave 2D pointed out that it has more bass. Absolutely. He said it's at the cost of mid bass, possibly, but compared to the AirPods Pro 2, the Pro 3 has more mid bass and more sub bass. It's just generally more bassy, and the bass is of nice quality. Like it's not overly loose. It's not bleeding into the mids a lot. So it's pretty decent bass. It's just more bass, right? The other thing is the spike he showed at 5.5 kilohertz, which I was worried by. It's there. I'm not entirely sure if it's exactly 5.5 kilohertz, but it's somewhere, I would say, subjectively, between 5 and 10 kilohertz, because I've heard this in other earphones before, and that's what it sounds like. What this does is makes certain vocals sound sharp. Like if you listen to Sia, her vocals sound sharp, and if you're sensitive to that 5.5 6 kilohertz region, then that's going to sound annoying to you. If you're not sensitive to that region, which a lot of people are not, then you're not going to care too much. What you're effectively getting is something that's not the relaxed sound of the AirPods Pro 2. I don't know why I keep showing this. I mean, I could show either one and you couldn't really tell on camera, but you're not getting that relaxed sound anymore, which is a bit of a shame. I really enjoyed the relaxed sound. Now you're getting more of a commercial sound, more bass, more vocal emphasis, and a general sharp edge to a multitude of vocals, which I am not a big fan of. It's not the end of the world, and I think a lot of people are just going to enjoy the sound. Just as a audio-centric review, I just wanted to point out that Dave 2D's measurements were, not without merit, certainly. Which brings me to some of the things listener said on his headphones.com video. So he said a couple of things that raised some alarm bells in the community and said, oh, we can't, there's a certain skill level to doing these measurements, and without that, you're just not getting proper results. What he said was true, but that skill level is not as high as people think. So first off, he said you have to spoof the sensor to get frequency response measurements, and that's something a lot of people don't know. To my knowledge, if someone has a frequency response measurement that they are presenting to you, there is no way they got it without spoofing the sensor. First of all, it's not rocket science, and it's not something new, and a lot of the reviewers have been spoofing sensors for years now. I in fact do noise cancelling measurements, and I've done so for a few years now, and you can't do that without spoofing the sensor unless they give you a way to turn off the sensor. Some earbuds do that. AirPods Pro, to my knowledge at least, has no way of doing that, so there's that. So spoofing sensor, everyone's doing it. This is not a high skill gap. Second one is the adaptive EQ and priming the earbud. So as far as adaptive EQ is concerned, yes, it does 200 times a second or something. I believe it constantly assesses what's going on in the ear, but that's not for frequency response alone. That's one part of it, but it's also for adaptive ANC, for transparency mode, for quashing sudden loud sounds. It helps with a multitude, about 3 or 4 different things it helps with. So the frequency response part, there's only really 2 things it has to do. If the fit in the ear changes a bit, so if the earbud sort of falls out of your ear ever so slightly, generally speaking, there are 2 things that are going to change. One is your bass leakage is going to happen, so you might have to increase your bass response to counteract that. And 2, your length mode resonance will change. So your peak that's usually at about 8 kilohertz will change, right? Or thereabouts. It won't change to a huge degree, and the results will still be usable, but you just have to know how to read it. And as long as the reviewer is being reasonable, he can still give you good information. So what does that mean? which brings me to the third point that listener brought up, that the IC711 is not nearly as accurate as the B1K5128, which is absolutely true. However, that doesn't mean you can't get usable results. So how do you get usable results? Don't make blanket claims. Say, for example, if I said this earbud has an 8 decibel bass rise, right? And based on the IC711 measurement, that's a reasonable thing to say. But if you took that to mean that this has an 8 decibel bass rise in the human ear, that would not be true. The human ear and the IC711 coupler have some discrepancies. But if I told you that if I took the same measurement rig and the same consistent measurements under the same conditions, the AirPods Pro 3 has 3 or 4 decibels more sub-bass, generally speaking, than the AirPods Pro 2, that is a reasonable thing to say, because everything else being the same measurement rig, same measurement conditions, this is the difference between the two. That is a valid result. So it really depends on the reviewer, how much diligence there is and how much conscientiousness there is in bringing you the information. That is when it's important. But for the average viewer, if I just tell you there's more sub-bass and mid-bass here, that is enough. And if I tell you, yes, there is more sub-bass and mid-bass, but it does not bleed into the mids and it does not mask the vocals, then that's good information, that's very useful, and that information can be gotten no matter which rig you're on. On the 711 coupler also, like if your mid-bass peak is higher than, say, your 3 kilohertz peak, yeah, your pinna gain peak, let's call it pinna gain peak for now, calm down, then I know for a fact that if you have heavy music that has, excitement across the frequency range, your vocals will probably sound a little masked to you because the bass will overpower it to a degree. This happens. And then it also depends on what sound you're hearing, what test track you're using if you're doing subjectively. For example, the Bose & Wilkins PX7S3 and say something like the Sivga Nightingale, both are not very well tuned, right? And both have this thing where in different ways, I'm not going to go into it, the bass is kind of higher than the pinna gain peak in some ways. And there's some masking because of the sheer amount of bass in relation to the vocal emphasis. But if you listen to a vocal track, if you listen to something where someone is just singing a cappella, you will never hear that. That's another problem with subjective reviews, is that they don't take into account a broad spectrum of type of music, and they don't test the earbuds thoroughly. They test it according to music they like, which is, it's not the whole picture. Having said that, these are things that you can infer from 711 measurements also. It's not that they are useless. The BNK5128 will give you more accurate results, but that does not necessarily mean they will give you more meaningful results to give you knowledge about the earbuds or to assist you in a purchase decision. They can, but it's not necessarily the case all the time. And finally, the priming of the earbud. This one, I'm not entirely sure how much of a priming it needs and how long the priming lasts, and maybe there's more information out there, and if you could link that information down in the comments, I'd love to learn more about this. But generally speaking, what I've noticed is I do measurements in a certain way, and a good reviewer generally will do measurements in a certain way. You take a frequency response, but you repeat it 5 or 6 times or 10 times with different seatings, at least 3-4 times, right, minimum, with different seatings, and then check it at different volume levels to see if there's something going on there as well. And then you average some results out and give that to the viewer, depending on what the results are. And that generally should take care of the priming. But what I also do often is I run broad spectrum noise. So 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, a noise signal, and that also gives you, and then you record it through the AirPods Pro 3, and that'll also give you a frequency response. That actually might be a better way to gauge frequency response in, say, more noisier environments. Like if you don't have an absolutely quiet room, that could help. That's something that actually Clinical told me about a few years ago. I didn't know that was a method until he mentioned it, and that was pretty cool. I've learned a lot from all these guys that I'm talking about, right? This is not a he's wrong, she's wrong kind of deal. The community is incredible from a wealth of knowledge point of view. I just want to point out that all these things, true as they are, generally speaking, a decent reviewer will, if he's doing certain things, will take care of most of that. Like, I don't think, It'd be interesting to know how much of a variance there would be based on a positional change in the ear. That would be a cool thing that we could find out about together when my full review comes out, or when headphones.com puts a more detailed review. That would be interesting. I'd like to know how much of a change in frequency response is affected by the AirPods Pro 3 with a change in positioning further in or further out of the ear, and what exactly changes. That would give us an idea of how much variance there can be in what the reviewers tell us. That would be interesting. But that's it. I just wanted to give you a subjective, quick review of the differences in sound. I don't think it's better sound. I don't think it's particularly great sound. It's just more V-shaped and more commercial. And there is a treble spike that makes vocals sharp. Some people, not all vocals, certain vocals are more affected than others. Some people are going to be bothered by it, some people are not. I don't think you upgrade here for sound quality per se. You upgrade if you want more bass. Essentially, that's what you upgrade to the AirPods Pro 3. Otherwise, you upgrade for the features and for greater battery life, quality of life things. Those are the things that the AirPods Pro 3 bring, not particularly breakthrough sound in a new, different way. In a nutshell, that's the AirPods Pro 3's subjective initial impressions video. Stand by for the full review. I will do some more testing and I'll come back with you. Come back with another video. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Stay happy, stay peaceful, stay colorful. Namaste.